Morning all. You may have heard about Vladimir Kramnik having some blunders in the candidates tournament. In round 9 there was an amazing opening blunder which I'd like to focus this video on to see how it could have possibly occurred to such a strong grandmaster and former world champion. Sergey Karjakin was playing white and played d4. Vladimir played knight f6. Then we have knight f3, a very solid move. After d5, usually white would play c4, but this is the second most popular move actually in my book, bishop f4. So it echoes, dare I say it, the London system, one of the most dreaded, most solid setups white can use. The bishop on f4 is a nuisance often on this diagonal. It has a bit of a drawish reputation at high levels. Khanty-Mansiysk is a fan of this opening, has used it many times. Black now often in this position plays c5. There's over 1,000 games in the live book with c5. Vladimir chose the second most popular, which is c6, so solid enough, although it does feed that bishop the whole diagonal. c5 would have anyway. So e3. Now usually, well, they're about the same popularity, either bishop f5 or bishop g4. So bishop g4 was chosen. You might notice actually here that why isn't this being played like a semi-Slav defense with e6? e6 is actually quite rare here. The top move is actually bishop f5, 141 games, bishop g4, 137, queen b6, 82. But you might think, well, what about this e6 we keep seeing, the Slav triangle? Very rare actually, with 6 games here in this position. Usually this isn't played. It is hemming in the bishop, perhaps unnecessarily in this position. White can play, for example, just c4 and has a nagging edge, one would think, if it hasn't been played before. In fact, on live book here after c4, all the game results, the top 2 after knight bd7 or bishop e7 have a slight advantage to white. Only small game samples. So okay, maybe it's not the end of the world for black, but for some reason in this particular position it isn't usually played to hem in the bishop. So we have bishop g4 played. Now both of these leave b7 a bit vulnerable, that weakness of the last move. And this next move played is c4. Often also knight bd2 is played instead of c4, but c4 makes way for queen b3 potentially on b7. In this position, with the bishop now outside the pawn chain, the most common move actually in live book is e6. So the Slav triangle set up here, big difference, bishop outside the pawn chain. And you might think, well, is queen b3 dangerous in this position? Queen b6 has been played, and this is known to be okay. It's still a little bit okay for white. In the game here, Vladimir chose a slightly rarer move, knight bd7. We have now knight c3, e6, and it looks like everything is fine. The bishop's outside the pawn chain, the Slav triangle set up. What's the big deal? Statistically, very small game samples. Queen b3 has been played before the most times in this position, still eyeing b7. Doesn't matter about the double pawns here. But the most common response for black is to play bishop takes f3 in this position, doubling the pawns. So bishop takes f3, then black could play, usually black plays queen b6, and this is going to be okay for white. The engines have this as fractionally better for white, slight advantage. White's got some dynamic pressure on the a file. For example, a6, b4, and the position is quite comfortable for white. But black is pretty solid here actually as well. It should be enough usually for a draw this position. There's nothing really much to write home about here. Okay, so Queen B3, just taking on F3. That's usually the move. I have live book bishop takes F3 6 games, Queen B6 1 game. So in the game, actually, Vladimir chose something not played here before. So this is only on move 7, believe it or not, and I do not have any references prior to this game of what was played here, which was D takes C4. So what was the idea behind this? Well, first of all, if bishop takes C4, then black can go ahead and transpose back, maybe double the pawns, and actually even has the option of knight B6. This might actually be a bit better now to attack the bishop than Queen B6, and this should be fine for black. Bishop D6, fine. We can even challenge this annoying bishop. Should be okay for black. On Queen takes C4, then again black can consider either doubling the pawns or play knight B6. This is okay for black. You can double the pawns here and then challenge the bishop. No problem. But the obvious thing is the B7 pawn. Why can't this be taken here after D takes C4? In taking the B7 pawn structurally, we've actually damaged black's structure quite significantly. Grandmasters obviously take account and base whole plans on structural damage, on how to inflict structural damage. The classic minority attack is about isolating pawns. It's a long-term strategy to isolate pawns. Often there are big plans. And here, it's for free, it seems, that black, the structure of black has been totally compromised here. Now usually when a very strong player does this, there's dynamic reasons to do this. Very strong, compelling dynamic reasons. In this position, Vladimir played bishop takes F3, so he's doubling the pawns. I'm not sure there's anything too much better than that technically. G takes, so we'll go with that. And I think the idea, I suspect from the press conference of this game, it's about to be revealed. Knight D5, it's targeting F4 and C3. So we can note here that knight takes D5. This is dangerous for white with the bishop here. C takes, because we've always got this bishop B4 check coming here, potentially. So, or have we? The queen would have to be evicted and the bishop's eyeing B8. So let's follow this through. Let's say rook G1. It's very interesting. In this position, black is still okay, even if he doesn't get bishop B4 check in. There seems to be no easy way of getting bishop B4 check in, but with G6 the engine suggests black is virtually okay. The pawn structure looks healthy here. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, equal on pawns. It's all right. There's no problem. So knight takes D5 wouldn't be, it's repairing black's pawns. So if we get knight D5, white plays bishop G3, and here we have the crux of the matter, which I think is the basis for the miscalculation. That after bishop B4, there's pressure being exerted on C3, and white is not obliged to play rook C1 here, not obliged. If rook C1 was played here, then black actually has a very interesting idea of H5, believe it or not. So threatening H4 is quite serious. But even so, white can be okay here in this position. Even in this position, it seems bishop takes d5, bishop takes, b takes, c takes. And with bishop f4 or c7, white should be okay, apparently. This looks okay. So it doesn't seem as though that's a big deal either. Just to play rook c1. You might think, well, we can't put pressure on the knight because we're going to lose the rook. But I think the bigger thing is also even stronger than rook c1 is bishop takes c4 is actually possible. Black doesn't really want to give up his dark square bishop here with bishop takes, because this is strengthening white's center. If knight takes c3 here, then actually bishop c7 is very nice. If queen e7 we lose the rook, black loses the rook. If queen c8, then here bishop a6 is strong, actually winning the exchange. Ouch. And the other point is, if knight takes, we just take the bishop on b4 with the queen, and white's still better, and black's structure is still compromised here, these isolated pawns. So we can actually put the queen here. It's very, very nice for white. So essentially, this is unfortunate, this position, that actually some sort of strange miscalculation has occurred here. Black has free of charge compromised black's pawn structure severely, and with black, the major thing that black is threatening is knight takes f4. The bishop just drops back. So bishop b4 just seems pointless here. So knight 5 to b6 was played. You might think, well, what about this c pawn here? If we try and like protect that pawn, then white just plays bishop takes c4, and this is still very, very pleasant for white. Bishop b4. We can either castle or just rook c1. Even just castling, it's very, very nice for white. Any knight takes c3, we can either just take actually simply, or queen takes b4 here, and we're better. Strongest is actually taking like this, rook ac1 apparently. The structure has just been compromised, it's just horrendous. Actually bishop a6 is also pretty strong, with these bishops again working wonders to win the exchange. So it's actually it actually looks like a complete opening disaster now after bishop g3. So Vladimir's move was knight 5 to b6, encouraging white to play queen takes c6. There's no penalty here for the queen. If rook c8, queen b5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A solid pawn up. In the game, after bishop b4, queen b5, with the solid pawn up here, c4 is also vulnerable. I think Vladimir just he sacrificed another pawn now. Instead of playing rook c8, white's okay here. White's doing more than okay apparently with a4. So the idea just to undo the protection of the knight, and then bishop takes c4 later. And this is actually difficult to parry. This very, very strong bishop on this diagonal is like the torturous London system bishop, making a great appearance in this game. What does black do here? We're just going to nudge this knight and take on c4 and be 2 pawns up potentially. So say castles a5. We can even allow knight takes c3. This is better for white as well, this position. It's just the tremendous position. Okay, so yeah, in the game, Vladimir goes actually 2 pawns down voluntarily, believe it or not. I think his idea is to set up a strong blockade fortress on the c4 square, and he nearly managed to do this, but White is a very resourceful player, Sergey Karjakin, and lifted the blockade later. I think we can leave the whole game after what happened in detail to another video, but you can see that Black, he did try and set up a c4 blockade. If I just very quickly skim the moves without too much commentary here. But remember, he's 2 pawns. This couldn't have been intentional to have this position 2 pawns down. So he's gone into Nimzovich mode, trying to blockade on c4 now. So he's got a c4 blockade. It's a noble attempt. From an engine point of view, actually, it should be noted this is not +2; it's just over +1. So the blockade is kind of respected even from a Houdini perspective. And White's got double pawns here, so it needs precise play from White. H4. It does look like a fantastic blockade attempt, to Vladimir's credit. So he didn't just resign after being 2 pawns down. Actually, the game lasted many more moves. It was actually won on move 64 from this position. I'll just skim the moves. Maybe for another video we'll actually check out in detail what happened. But basically, White got into a winning rook and pawn ending eventually, which Sergey Karjakin described as crazy rooks, with some amusement. He likes the crazy rooks. Reminds me of slot races. I used to play with my brother a lot. Slot races, rook and pawn endings like this, just 2 rooks each. A bit like how they move in slot races, up and down. So crazy rooks, and Karjakin just pressed through his advantage, eventually taking his time, and he won here on move 64. But yeah, this was possibly the worst opening position anyone had in the tournament so far. Just basically being 2 pawns down here. Yeah, just 2 pawns down. The attempts, I mean, this position is just miserable. The other positions are just miserable. If it wasn't 2 pawns down, then Black's blockade strategy wouldn't have surfaced. It would have still been significantly worse. But so the way Vladimir played it was to go 2 pawns down, not just 1, but get a blockade strategy going on c4. But it just wasn't enough to hold. I think this is where it optimally looked great visually, but it was just broken down in this position. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.